The Fanboy Podcast. Hi everybody, Mario Francisco Robles MFR here with you, and here I am with a revisitation of Man of Steel. It's funny, when I first saw Man of Steel, I wasn't yet doing this stuff for a living or even as a hobby or anything. I was still just a fan, like one of you guys out there. I would write about things like this on my little sort of personal blog, but for me it was just my own brain droppings. The bulk of my film analysis was still taking place at a diner after the movie with me and my friends analyzing it, or me and my family sitting around talking about the movie forever and ever and ever. And it was actually after Man of Steel where I started writing about this sort of stuff with more frequency on my personal blog, and friends started to say, hey, you know what? Some of these insights you have are pretty good. You should try to write for an actual film site. And inadvertently, Man of Steel led me down this path where here I am now 4.5 years later, and I've been doing this for a while. And I've got you people checking me out on YouTube, and I have the Fanboy Podcast, and I have my stuff getting published at all these different sites and whatnot, and it's pretty darn exciting. By the way, I hope you guys are enjoying Justice League Week here at Fanboy. Yesterday I released the video for why I don't believe Justice League will be hitting the $1 billion mark. I also unleashed an editorial at random on all of you on how I hope Justice League creates a bit of a soothing and a calming, and has a sort of calming effect on the DC fandom at large, because, you know, these last, 16 months have been pretty tough. They've been tough on the online news and writing and blogging community. They've been tough on DC fans in general. They've been tough on the folks who loved Zack Snyder's vision and are bummed as hell to see it go. And they've even been tough on those of us who are, accepting of the changes, because it's just been a lot of everyone at each other's throats. So I wrote an editorial that I put up yesterday, basically hoping that Justice League leads to some sort of ceasefire. So if you have not yet read that, you could see that at elfanboy.com. If you have not yet seen why Justice League won't crack $1 billion, you could see that right here on the YouTube. And now here we are today, Tuesday. Today you get an episode of the Fanboy Podcast with Rick Shu of Batman on Film as a special guest. And you've also got this revisitation of Man of Steel. Now, it's interesting, Man of Steel, I saw 3 different times in theaters in the span of about 8 days. First, I saw it on June 13th, which was the Thursday right before the official opening on June 14th. I saw it like one of those midnight showings, because those were still, it was still, Thursday night previews were pretty special still back in 2013. Not like nowadays where you could see it at 7 o'clock on a Thursday if you wanted. It used to be a late night thing that only the most devout, most hardcore fans would do, because it involved staying up really late on a Thursday when most people have to work or go to school the next day. And you're seeing it because you're just so eager. You want to be the first person in New York or wherever it is that you live that, who gets to see it. Thursday previews aren't that anymore. But either way, so I saw it on Thursday, June 13th at, I believe, a midnight showing, or at the very least a very late night showing in Times Square. Then I saw it 3 days later on the afternoon of Sunday, June 16th. And then I saw it one final time the following Friday, June 21st. Now, why do I do this? Why did I do this? I'm a huge Superman fan. That character and his mythology means so much to me. And, in case you don't know my whole history with all this stuff, just know that Superman is just a huge deal to me. I don't know, it's hard to put it all into words what that character has meant to me over the years, and what he symbolized for me as a child, and the way, in certain ways, I try to live, and through how I feel Superman would want me to. That sounds way creepier than it's supposed to, but I try to allow his example to exemplify the type of man I want to be. So I love the character, and I wanted to give this film a fair shot. I came in wanting to love it. The first time I saw it, I thought it was pretty good. I wasn't in love with it, but I thought, you know what, this is pretty good. The second time I saw it, I kind of started seeing more of its flaws and thinking, okay, it's not pretty good, it's just kind of okay. And then by the following Friday, when I saw it the third time, that's when, to me, it just kind of felt like, okay, this is kind of a dud, for me at least. For me, Man of Steel misfired on a lot of key things. And to this day, a lot of it sort of really bums me out, because there's a lot about the movie that really does work. And there's a lot in there that could have led to a film that I think would have pleased everybody. Classic Superman fans, people who weren't originally Superman fans because they thought he was too overpowered or too corny or too cheeseball, but suddenly now there's a version of him that even they can like. I thought this could have been something very with a much wider appeal to everyone, because there are elements in there that are just beautiful. There's great storytelling, aesthetics at play. There's masterful casting. More on that in a second. There's just, there are a fair amount of things that really work in Man of Steel. And for me, it was such a shame at the time to see the things that I thought didn't work, and see how those issues became more and more glaring every time I saw the film. And basically, since June 21st, 2013, I have not sat down to watch the film from start to finish. I've caught little snippets here and there on HBO or on TV or whatnot, and I've kind of, I've probably technically seen it a fourth time, but never in one sitting. So tonight was the first time since June 21st, 2013, that I actually sat down to do that. And today's date, let's see, today is November 13th, 2017. So it's been a very long time. So first, let's talk a little bit about what about the experience remained the same for me, okay? A couple of things that remain the same in the 4 years since I've last seen it is I still love the Krypton sequence. I love it to pieces. I think that entire opening sequence is just beautiful and jaw-dropping. I love the design. I love the music that they use. I love the dialogue. I love the performances from just across the board. I think that Krypton sequence starts the movie off in a very breathtaking way. It's loaded with promise. It's almost like, are we watching a Star Wars movie? Like this, it was surprising and gorgeous, and the breathtaking amount of imagination that went into it. Just every time I see it, I think this is awesome. So I still love the Krypton sequence. I'm still absolutely enamored with Hans Zimmer's score. I think the score for Man of Steel is one of the finest bits of superhero cinema scoring that I've heard in many, many years. I often lament on the Fanboy Podcast, and to anyone who will listen, even just kind of on the street, maybe even at 7-Eleven once in a while, I'll just pull someone aside and I'll say, why do the Marvel movies never have good themes that carry over from movie to movie? Why doesn't it seem like the old days of a character having an iconic theme that everyone can hum has just sort of disappeared? And I thought Man of Steel had one of those rare scores where it really just, every character had their own melody, and there was a real sense of drama and beauty and an epic scope to Hans Zimmer's score. He did not phone this one in. There was a lot going on there, and it's just a feast for the ears. Then, the overall casting, I just think, for as much crap as I give Zack Snyder about a lot of his other choices, his casting is top of the line. I love everyone he's chosen for these DC movies. Top to bottom, I think Amy Adams is a wonderful Lois Lane. I think Perry White, Lawrence Fishburne is inspired. I think Russell Crowe was phenomenal. Michael Shannon, really he was an amazing Zod. Henry Cavill, I think, is a very good Superman, even though I've had my qualms with him. Primarily in Batman v Superman, which I will be reviewing and putting up here tomorrow. But overall, I think Henry Cavill is a good fit for this role. I just think in general, the casting of this movie and all of Zack Snyder's sort of DC work thus far in the casting department has been top tier. And the other thing that remains the same is I still hate the third act. That is still just a tough one for me to swallow. And now this is actually going to segue into what's different. So for me, the main thing that I walked away from on this viewing, on this revisitation of Man of Steel tonight, is that I actually like less of it than I thought I did. I've always, it's been years. So when I talk about the film, I'm always sort of hazy about the ratio of things. But over the years, my recollection of how much of Man of Steel I really liked and was really engaged by has sort of gotten a little rosier than it actually is. I've always sort of said, like, oh yeah, I think the first hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes are phenomenal, and it's only those last 30 or 40 minutes that sort of lose me. Tonight, I realized that's not true. It's actually practically the halfway mark. I went and I wrote down exactly where things take a dip for me, and it's exactly at the 1 hour and 12 minute mark. In case you're not watching it with a counter on, that is as soon as we leave that interrogation room with Superman and Lois, where he has that little scene there with General Swanwick and with Emil Hamilton. As soon as we leave that interrogation room where he's speaking to them through the two-way mirror, that's for me where things, just my attention span starts to go away. It becomes very much just like, here's a ton of exposition, here's a ton of violence, here's a ton of exposition, here's a ton of violence, and there's not a lot going on in it that really speaks to me. And one thing I will just say, even though we're kind of speaking sort of out of sequence right now, something that still very much does speak to me in that third act is that I feel like Perry White and Lombard and Jenny Olsen are perhaps the most stunningly emotional and heroic aspect of that entire third act. And that's kind of a shame in a Superman movie. He's supposed to be, in theory, the one who's inspirationally heroic and who fills you with emotion and adrenaline as he's doing all of these self-sacrificing, amazing things. But for me, that scene where Jenny is buried in the rubble, screaming for her life and reaching for Perry, and he's coming to help her, and he says, I'm not going to leave you. And he calls Lombard over, and Lombard, even though there's a part of him that probably wants to get the hell out of there, he even says out loud, he goes, damn it, because he knows he can't run away. He won't allow himself to. So he grabs that pole, and him and Perry are trying to get her out of the rubble. And then they have that moment where they basically just accept their fate. They see the cloud of smoke and all the dust coming their way, and then the debris, and they know we're about to die. And they look at each other deeply into their eyes as they try to embrace these final moments here on Earth. And then at the last second, Superman destroys the world engine, and they're saved. That sequence for me had more heroics in it and had more genuine feeling and emotion and stakes than practically anything Superman did from the attack on Smallville on. For me, everything, I get very numb from that point on. And I kind of realized tonight, I took notes. I don't usually take notes, but I wrote a few pages of notes while I was watching the movie. because I figure, you know what, I've seen it a bunch of times. It's okay if once in a while I write something down. But yeah, I realize, like, I think I get numb during that third act as a defense mechanism, because it's the only way to prevent myself from becoming extremely, extremely sort of upset and emotional while watching the thing. And it's not like I'm referring to upset and emotional because the story wants me to. I'm upset and emotional because of the amount of innocent people who are dying, and the fact that the collateral damage is astronomical. Now, listen, maybe I have some personal issues here that affect my viewing of this, but just hear me out. Okay, because I know some of you will tune out or roll your eyes as soon as I bring up the collateral damage. So many of you have these sort of ready-to-go defenses for it. But my issue with the collateral damage is, like, the film itself attempts to be very sort of realistic. It attempts to be very much like true science fiction. It's like a what-if tale. What would happen if a flying alien suddenly appeared on Earth? How would mankind respond? How would he try to assimilate? How would, it tries to really sort of give that real world, very sort of Nolan-esque aesthetic where this is real life, and how would people in actuality respond to this sort of situation? And the way it's shot, the way everything looks here on Earth, the way people react to Clark and everything along the way. This is not like a hyper-stylized narrative. This isn't a campy movie. This isn't some fantasy movie. It's a movie that's meant to feel like we're here on Earth and this is happening. So the stakes are real. The people are real. This is not like a little kiddie cartoon type of superhero movie. So when I see skyscrapers falling towards the Earth, and people are running around screaming, I feel those stakes. I feel those stakes because that's the kind of movie this has been thus far. It's been a serious movie that begs for you to take it seriously. And with that in mind, for me, I'm born and raised here in New York. So a lot of this stuff hits close to home. I was here during 9/11. I was trapped in a subway car underground when the World Trade Center went down. I ran up into the streets as everyone was running around wondering what's going on. I heard a plane hit the towers. My mother was supposed to be at the towers that day, but she randomly took a day off from work and she wasn't there that day. So for me, anything that brings up and uses that imagery from 9/11, I can't just take as like, oh, this is popcorn entertainment. Let me just sit back and enjoy this. No, I'm looking at those fucking buildings go down, and I'm thinking, oh my God, all these innocent people are dying. Is this going to be addressed in any sort of meaningful way? Does Superman even look around or seem to care that there are civilians running around and panicking and hiding behind fire hydrants while he's boxing with Zod in the middle of the street? Like, I'm waiting to see Superman be Superman, kind of realizing, oh my God, this is not, how do I stop Zod and minimize what's happening here, because hundreds and thousands of people are dying during this attack on Earth. What can I do to stop that aside from just beating the crap out of Zod? And the thing is, a lot of the violence to me just felt like it was way over the top. Like there was almost like a fetishization of it, where it felt like Snyder just really wanted to, like, it was almost like I almost started laughing because, like, let's say, for example, I were to get up and I was going to throw myself into that bookshelf. If I threw myself into that bookshelf, a bunch of the frames would fall off, a bunch of books would fall over, but that would kind of be it. I'm only a person. That's a sturdy bookshelf. That's all that would happen. In Zack Snyder's Man of Steel sort of physics, if I fell into that, the entire thing would just come apart and books would fly all over my apartment. it just felt like every single opportunity he could get to blow things up and really, really maximize the damage, he did that, and he seemed to get off on that. And in the months following, following the release of the film, he was talking about, well, yeah, I wanted the violence to be mythic in scope. I wanted it to be epic. This is what would happen if two, gods fought and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, okay, that's all well and good. But then if you're going to have that level of violence, you have to try to address it in some way. You can't have Superman and Lois in the rubble of a third of a city that has been demolished with ashes flying around them suddenly kiss and have a line about, oh, I hear it's all downhill after the first kiss. Well, that's only when you kiss a human. Like, that's not the time for one-liners. That is tone deaf. That is just ridiculous. Certain franchises can get away with that sort of stuff. When Pacific Rim does it and buildings go down, you don't bat an eyelash because it's like a big cartoon. It's all over-the-top characters. It's over-the-top violence. Everything is, amped up to umph degree. It's an anime movie come to life. Man of Steel was not that. For 95% of that movie, they were trying to hit the point home that, no, this is a serious film. And we're taking real-world stakes and looking at the Superman mythology through the eyes of the real world. So when you establish that sort of tone, you can't just suddenly shrug off and not pay attention to the fact that you've just killed, not you, Superman, but within the confines of the movie, thousands of people have died, and there's seemingly zero acknowledgement of it. And we go straight into a scene where... what's her name? The Carol, whatever, the one, that little Easter egg character who's from the Green Lantern mythology says to General Swanwick, well, I think he's kind of hot. Like, you go right into a joke, and it's like, this is not a joke. A third of New York, essentially, that's what Metropolis is in this movie, that's what it looks like. A third of New York just got leveled. Okay? There are thousands of dead people and hundreds of thousands of families mourning all over the place right now. And you don't have Superman at all seemingly give a damn about it. And that's also what makes the Zod kill not really work on an emotional level. Because I've never had an issue with him killing Zod. I'm fine. I'm not one of those purists who says, oh, Superman can't kill Zod. But I'm of the mind that the way that scene is staged and the way it is built to is extremely, extremely, extremely underwhelming. Because, I mean, how do I put this into words? I mean, I've been having this fight for years, it feels like. How can I sum this up in a way that's not beating a dead horse? He's fighting in the streets. Civilians everywhere, buildings collapsing around him, and he's not even so much as looking at it. Superman leapfrogs over a LexCorp oil tanker. Instead of trying to stop it, he leapfrogs over it like Mr. Action Hero Man, allows it to explode into a parking garage behind him, while Zack Snyder makes sure to let us all know that there are people running around him, screaming and crying and trying to get away. But Superman never acknowledges them. So he leapfrogs over the LexCorp thing, the building explodes, cars start falling out of the garage, and he's just having a good old-fashioned boxing match with Zod as people are cowering and probably dying from all the explosions and dying and falling cars happening. So we go from a Superman who's that sort of like, well, if people are dying, that's just what's going to happen. I have to focus on Zod, to all of a sudden, in that train terminal, in what is essentially the stand-in for New York's Grand Central Station, suddenly, when Zod says, well, I'm going to kill these 3 people, now all of a sudden the stakes are real, and now all of a sudden he has to do whatever he can to stop Zod. It just doesn't ring true. It doesn't feel like he would suddenly care this much all of a sudden. It feels like the caring should have probably been there to some degree all throughout the fight, with him trying to lure him away, with him trying to minimize how many people are getting killed and how much damage is being done. we never even get a sense that he's not trying to kill Zod. Take that, let's think about that for a second. Yes, we as Superman fans who grew up on him know that killing Zod is probably not his first choice. But within the confines of this story, this is a reboot. This is a whole new Superman. They never take the time to establish that he's not trying to kill Zod. Throughout the entire fight, he's beaten the ever-loving holy hell out of him the whole time, throwing him through buildings and everything. We never get the sense that he's trying to not kill him. We never get the sense that he's pleading with him to, let's stop this. There has to be another way. We can coexist, whatever. You never get the sense that he's really trying his best to not kill Zod. So that kind of saps a lot of the drama when he does kill him. And those of us who did feel it, because I know there are people who felt it, and to a certain extent I felt it the first time I saw it. If you do feel that sadness and that despair when he kills Zod, it's more so because of what you brought to the movie, not what the movie showed you. You brought your Superman fandom, and you know in your heart what that must have taken for Superman to do. For him to make the decision to snap Zod's neck, that is a tragic, heroic moment that's supposed to make you go, wow, he had to sacrifice and compromise his morals to do this, and he just gave up so much. This is heavy stuff, Doc. But for the actual film itself, the way it's presented, we never, ever, ever are given a sense that he's ever trying not to kill Zod. So the Zod kill falls flat. The stakes are just kind of all over the place in that last sequence. I struggle to know how to feel when demigods are beating the hell out of each other, and every once in a while it looks like they're hurt, but more often than not, it looks like nothing really affects them. That's not a bad thing, necessarily. If they're demigods, whatever, they're very powerful and they probably have very high tolerances for pain. But there's no sort of sense of the scale of the violence. When is he being hurt? When is Zod being hurt? When is someone actually getting the upper hand? Like I remember while watching the Smallville sequence tonight, I'm seeing him fight, Superman fight Feora and that big dude, and they're beating the ever-loving snot out of each other. And at some point, there's this close-up of Superman on his back on the ground, and the big dude lifts up his arms and he goes to smash him, and you see Superman, and he gets out of the way, and you see he smashes the ground. And a part of me is like, well, why are you even getting out of the way? Apparently, you can get hit by whatever and you're fine. So, it's indicative of the way that the action was staged, the way the entire third act unfolded. It was just sort of dizzying and numb, and it was hard to really sense what the true danger was, and if Superman was even cognizant of what was going on around him. Something else that jumped out at me, by the way, is all these years people have been shouting me down, saying oh, well, no, he took Zod out to space to try to, get him away from Metropolis. And even in that little sequence where they crash into the Wayne Corp satellite, that's all, that was his attempt. But I found out tonight that that's BS. I paid extra attention this time, and it's actually Zod who takes them to outer space. Zod. I want you to go back and rewatch it if you're one of these people who's been selling that line to people all these years. He throws Superman through a building. As Superman's falling out of the building, seemingly almost unconscious, because every once in a while he can be knocked out apparently, Zod takes him, and they end up into space. So it was actually Zod who took them away from Metropolis, not Superman. Go figure. So all these people trying to tell me that Superman was trying to do the right thing, you clearly weren't watching the movie. And all that sort of numbing, wanton, soulless violence brings me to one of the other things about the film that I find so frustrating. I felt it then and I felt it tonight. That the unfulfilled promise of hope. All throughout the film, we're told, hope, hope, hope. The S is a symbol for hope. You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. There's all these different moments throughout the movie where we are meant to believe that he's going to become this inspirational figure to the people of Earth. But we never really see that happen in the film itself. There's very little moments in the movie where we get to see him actually be that inspiration. And for me, it just feels like there's a lot of lip service to the idea of hope. But within Man of Steel itself, all Earthlings would think of him as here's a flying guy who beat the hell out of another flying guy. And there are a bunch of people who were dead, but I guess he saved the planet. So that's pretty cool. I like him for saving the planet. But I still don't know where he stands on things because all he did was just beat the hell out of a bad guy. So for me, that whole the hope aspect of it was severely lacking, and to me that blows a big hole in terms of right into the heart and the emotional crux of what the story's trying to do. Is this idea of hope, and they never really follow through on it. And I really think that comes down to your idea of heroism. All right, I've used this comparison before. What do you find inherently more heroic? A SWAT team, blowing its way into a building with terrorists, and they're shooting, and there's grenades, and there's they're using a lot of blunt force to try to save the day, and they're there in their tactical riot gear, and it's a very sort of militaristic situation. Do you consider that like the warm and fuzzy idea of heroism, or are you more touched by firefighters racing into a burning building to save an elderly woman and her cat on the top floor? Which one of those things gives you the warm and fuzzies? To me, that is where the hope comes into play and where the warmth of true heroism comes into play. In this film, it felt like Man of Steel, Superman was essentially the SWAT team type of hero. A lot of blunt force, a lot of here are my powers, hear me roar, here I'm going to go and I'm going to beat the holy hell out of you and I'm going to blow stuff up. But at the end of the day, I will have done something good. Whereas when I think of Superman, I think more about the firefighter type of hero. The ones who are self-sacrificing, who have a lot to lose, but they just have to do the right thing. They have to get in there. They have to put themselves through great peril just to save one or two people if need be. But, they don't care. They just have to do what's right. And I feel like had that been more the goal here in that third act, a Superman with those kinds of priorities, then that whole ideal of hope thing would have come through much, much clearer. And it would have actually been a sort of uplifting story. It would have made that whole third act and the disaster porn of it all land much smoother. If we just constantly felt like, here's a Superman who cares. Here are people who are seeing him put everything on the line for them. And here they all are coming together in the face of this unspeakable tragedy. But instead, the tragedy is just sort of glazed over. We see that Metropolis is left in ruins. And then from that point on, we just come back later and there's Clark on his bike riding through Metropolis. And we're supposed to be all chipper on our way towards that happy Hollywood ending with him at the planet and his glasses on. And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And now, since we are sort of working backwards, and I got the part of the movie that I can't stand out of the way, which is the third act, let's talk a little bit about that first act, because that houses all of the stuff that I love. The first act, the second act, the whole first hour and 12 minutes has a lot of stuff in there that I absolutely love. I love how relatable they make Kal-El, they make Clark in this. They really sort of humanize him by the sequences where they show how how sort of overwhelmed he is by his powers. Pardon me. How overwhelmed he was by his powers, and what an outcast and a freak he feels like, as opposed to feeling godlike. He feels like an outcast and like he can't really be just one of the other kids because he has these abilities that limit his ability to relate to them and to do the things that all the other kids get to do. So I love that aspect of it. That heartbreaking sequence where he finds out that he's not of this earth, and he tells Jonathan, can't I just keep pretending I'm your son? Like, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. That comes straight out of Secret Origin. It's a great, great little character trope that they've given Clark in the more recent iterations of the character. And I just that stuff really, really speaks to me on very sort of deep, beautiful levels. A lot of that first hour is so majestic. It really is. With the music and with how grand they make the mythology feel. He feels important. When Lara gives birth, it feels monumental. It feels epic. Just his arrival onto Krypton, Kal-El, feels like a presence to be reckoned with. He's born and that animal roars off in the distance, and it's like the prince has been born. The king, the one-day king has arrived. And he feels there's heft. There's heft and weight to Kal-El and to eventually Clark when he's here on Earth. And I love that. To me, the most Supermanly moments in the movie happen before he ever dons the costume, which is somewhat ironic, I would say. One is I still, that bus sequence for me is still one of the most beautiful Superman moments in any Superman movie thus far. The fact that he feels the need to defy his father's wishes and save all those kids because he just can't help himself. And he even saves the bully that was just harassing him there on the bus. To me, that is Superman in a nutshell. The other moment is at the bar, when he confronts the trucker who's harassing the waitress. The restraint he shows as he goes over to help her, and this guy's a total jerk to him and throws the beer at him, and he shoots those cold blue eyes at him, and he would love to just flick this guy out into the atmosphere, but he knows I can't do that. To me, that is another perfectly little Superman moment. And in general, the idea of him as the secretive guardian angel, who really should probably be in the shadows, unless he's ready to come out full-fledged. He really should just kind of be keeping a low profile, but he can't help himself. Everywhere he goes, whenever he sees any kind of distress, whether it's a waitress being harassed or an oil refinery exploding in the middle of the ocean, he has to spring to action. That is Superman. That is Clark. He can't help himself. And there's even a great line in there by Lois. Amy Adams delivers this great line. I believe it's in the graveyard sequence, where she goes, I don't think you can help that in terms of stopping helping people. That's the only way he'd ever be able to just disappear. I love that. To me, that is yes, they get it. They get it. Superman can't help himself. He just has to do the right thing. He doesn't care about himself. He doesn't care if the police come after him or if the army wants to dissect him and treat him like an alien and try to throw him in prison or whatever. He doesn't care. He has a big heart and he just wants to help people. To me, that is what Superman is all about. And that's what makes that third act so hard to really swallow, because he seems to care so little. But anyway, okay. I tried to wrap up the third act earlier. In terms of other things I really loved, let's see. I'm going to look over here at my notes. Oh, I picked up a couple of funny little Easter eggs this time that I didn't catch the first two times. There are two little audio Easter eggs that I don't know if you guys would know or appreciate half as much as I did, but during the first flight, when he's really flying, not the crash landing flights, when he's actually flying, I'm pretty positive they snuck in the flying sound from The Adventures of Superman with George Reeves. That like very sort of windy, that like the sort of high pitched sort of like screeching sound that they had there. You hear it very prominently before he does the first like sonic boom, when he's just sort of flying through the clouds, and it's a close up on his face. I swear they took that sound straight out of the Adventures of Superman, which I really dug. And also they have a Wilhelm scream. I didn't know that. That's a real sort of film nerd thing, but the Wilhelm scream has been used in hundreds, probably, maybe dozens. Maybe I'm overblowing, but dozens of movies, and you've definitely heard it. It's been in pretty much every Star Wars movie ever. It was in, I believe it's been used in every Indiana Jones movie. All kinds of TV series, even video games have used it. It's this very unique type of scream that came from a TV show. Someone sampled this character named Wilhelm getting shot, and the way he shrieked became such like an in-joke in the industry that people just find ways to sneak the Wilhelm scream into things. So if you want, after this, you should YouTube Wilhelm scream compilation, and you'll get a kick out of how many movies have used it. You know, it's a favorite of George Lucas's, that's for sure, and Steven Spielberg's. But yeah, the Wilhelm scream is used in Man of Steel when they're in Metropolis and Lois is on the airplane that is getting ready to drop the Clark's old craft into the ship and create the black hole and that whole thing. There's a soldier on there sort of standing between Lois and Hamilton, who he's trying to get Lois's attention, and he goes, "Miss Lane!" And then like something explodes, and that's when Feora arrives on the ship and that guy dies. Well, as that guy's flying away, it's a Wilhelm scream. So I got a kick out of that. I didn't catch that the first time around. Let's see. What else can I say that's good, since I spent so damn long talking about what I didn't like? You know what? I do have to hit something. I hate the truck thing. I love when he defends the waitress from the trucker, but I hate the punchline at the end of it. Not because I think there shouldn't be a joke there. I love the idea that Clark, kind of couldn't help himself, and when he left the restaurant, he just had to wreck this guy's truck just to kind of get the last word. Even though it would be sort of immature of Clark to do, I think it's very human of him to do. And if any of us had the kind of abilities he has, we'd probably do stuff like that. I just hate the way it was done. I hate the fact that rather than just kind of having like a couple of downed poles crushing the truck, or a tree collapsed onto the truck and damaging it, which would totally get the same sort of joke, and people would laugh in the theater, and it's a cute little moment. Zack Snyder had to stage it so that the truck is essentially suspended in midair with poles through it, sort of holding it up. Like, there's no way that could have happened. And again, if we're trying to make it seem like this is a real world scenario, that is another example of where Snyder sort of just whenever he's allowed to sort of flex his own sort of visual flair and sort of show some creative liberty and do things that aren't necessarily in the script. Because I'm sure the script just says trucker walks out, sees truck destroyed. It's up to Snyder how it was destroyed. And it's just so over the top that it shatters the internal logic of the story. If the whole point is he's trying to keep a low profile, how the hell would anyone explain that? As soon as the rest of the truckers, as soon as everyone comes out, they would all look at this and be like, well, clearly some sort of monster showed up. Some sort of larger than life insane thing has just happened here. Because how did this truck end up with 4 different things going through it, impaling it, and now it's above the ground? And like, a lot of this movie to me felt like Zack Snyder, like a kid in a candy store. This was his biggest project. They gave him this huge budget. They gave him the keys to the Superman mythology, and they said, go make a blockbuster. And he almost couldn't help himself. So every little place where he could take one of those like one-sentence descriptions and turn it into something much bigger, he did it. He went big because he didn't want to go home. And to me, it actually betrays what was a pretty solid script. I think Goyer wrote a pretty solid script based on the story by Christopher Nolan and Goyer. I just think, and that kind of brings me back to the third act, not to harp on it, but, it's been said even back in the day with like Lord of the Rings, right? Where they could take a paragraph, what was a paragraph on the page in the Lord of the Rings novel becomes a half-hour-long war sequence in the movie, because that's where the director really kind of gets to take their liberties. Because in terms of the main plot points, in terms of the dialogue, they stick to what's in the script. But whenever it becomes like an action sequence, when it becomes something where it's kind of more open-ended, that's where the director kind of gets to go, all right, well, this is where I get to have fun. I'm not the writer, but I get to make this 3-sentence description into whatever the hell I want it to be. So I'm sure the script for Man of Steel probably says, Superman and Zod fight throughout Metropolis. But it's up to Snyder to stage it a particular way. And it was Snyder's choice to stage it with Superman and Zod basically, helping to finish level a third of a city, regardless of how many people are running around screaming and panicking. That was Zod. That was Zack Snyder's choice. And between the trucker moment, the truck moment, and the third act, it just feels like every time Snyder had the opportunity to do whatever he wanted and kind of go off script, he just went too damn far with it, and he didn't think about the ramifications on the world at large that's being established by this script. So, in summation, now having revisited Man of Steel for the first time in almost 4.5 years, I like it less than I thought I did. Its issues just become more and more pronounced every time I see it, even with the benefit of years of added perspective, even with Batman v Superman having come out and a lot of people saying, oh, that's going to retroactively help fix some of the issues with Man of Steel because they're going to address a lot of the things that went wrong and blah, blah, blah. Well, I saw Batman v Superman and it didn't fix it. In fact, in certain ways, it made it much worse. So, Man of Steel, I don't even know what sort of letter grade to give it. Right now, I guess I would have to give it, I'm somewhere between I'm going to go B-. I will give it a B- just based on the fact that I like that first hour and 12 minutes so much. It's like half of a good movie. So since I really enjoy that first half, I will give it a B-. I gave Batman v Superman last year when I saw it a B+. Stay tuned tomorrow to see what I think of Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this review. I hope you're enjoying Justice League Week here at elfanboy.com. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, please subscribe, please like, please share, and heck, if you want to support the cause, visit patreon.com/elfanboy. I'm going to have much more regular YouTube content to go along with the weekly podcast that I've been running now for about 8 months. So thanks for joining me, and until next time, adios.